Hello. Today's emergency management briefing is on a fairly weighty subject. It's about active shooter awareness and response. And what I'm going to be presenting is a model that's been adopted by FEMA and a number of law enforcement agencies throughout the country. It's called the Run, Hide, and Fight model. And it's fairly lengthy, so the way we're going to do it is a little bit differently. What we're going to be doing over the next few months is to separate it out into three specific segments. Today's segment will present a brief overview of the entire program and the approach, and then I'm going to emphasize the run element of that particular program. So the slides will have some very salient information. They'll be having an opportunity to discuss this toward the end, but for the most part, I've got some key points I'd like to present. There's a video at the beginning too. So let's get to it and let's get started. So as I indicated, what we're going to be doing over the next 3 months in these emergency management briefings is we're going to be looking at the Run, Hide, and Fight program overview. And this is a program that was developed for FEMA by the National Center for Biomedical Research and Training, and a number of different law enforcement agencies are actually applying this. So the three components that we're looking at are Run, Hide, and Fight. Today, we'll have a brief overview on the issue, and then we will immediately dig into the run aspect. And essentially, running means removing yourself from that active threat environment. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening, why this issue is so important, and it's definitely something that we all need to be aware of. So let's go to the next slide. As an overview, it's a difficult thing to acknowledge in our society that this is becoming more and more important, and it's a very strong likelihood that each of us at one point in our life will probably be affected by some incident of active shooting in some capacity. And overall, we're seeing that the numbers are increasing. We're seeing that the amount of fatalities are increasing as well. And the key thing here is to understand that there's really no way to predict when an active shooting environment or situation or occurrence might happen. There's a bunch of different factors that contribute to these. They could involve grievances, they could be domestic violence related, they just could also be political statements, but we're seeing more and more of this happening in our society. And the key point here, I think, that I'd like to emphasize is that since most active shooting incidents, and they've had a chance to analyze these, are over in under 10 minutes, it is critically important that everybody who might be in an environment where such an event might occur prepare themselves both mentally and physically in the event that an active shooter situation occurs. Unfortunately, with the increase in the number of events that are happening throughout the country and the world, a lot of research has been able to figure out certain things that we can predict. And it's difficult, as again I mentioned, that these things are very unpredictable, but there are some commonalities that we can look at. One, focusing on 2022, we've seen in that year alone, there's been 313 casualties and 50 different incidents here. And we've learned that in most cases, a lot of these events do happen in the afternoon, that the majority of the individuals taking part in these events are male. And there are certain days of the week that we should be aware that these events do happen more often, depending on what the circumstances and the location are. And handguns and ARs are probably the most common weapon used, and that only, and this is an important one, only 48% of the incidents did shooters actually have a known connection to a victim or a location. And the reason that's important is because in some cases, depending on the industry, there is a higher likelihood that they are going to be related to domestic violence events or relationship events. But again, that's only half the time. I think the most important thing from this slide in particular is to notice that the events are increasing. So there was a slight dip during COVID, but again, the events are starting to climb again. So again, the likelihood of something happening is, I mean, there's definitely a chance of it, but the most important thing is that we all need to be prepared and take the right steps to understand what we can do if an incident does occur. So let's transition directly to the element component run. The most important thing that anybody can do is, no matter where you are, always be aware of your surroundings. Figure out where the exits are, figure out where safe rooms might be, corridors might be. Basically, get a good snapshot of the environment that you're in. So make yourself familiar with that. I mean, I do this on a regular basis. If we're going out shopping, we're going to a movie, we're going to a mall or a restaurant. So that's never a bad tactic to get yourself into a habit of doing too. In the event that something happens, make yourself familiar with some of the indicators. There might be the audible clues, there might be people screaming, people running. Sometimes you might not even hear things like gunshots, depending on what type of equipment is used or what the layout and possibly the density of the walls are. But look for the clues when something happens, and then immediately, quickly, and quietly, but very decisively get yourself out of the situation. It's important to prioritize personal safety. And this is a tough one too, because there may be people who are hesitant to run. There may be people that you may need to assist. You have to make a very quick judgment. But again, personal safety is very important. But then some people will stop to help others. And there's really no right answer. The important thing is that you think this through before an incident actually occurs. Another thing to remember is that nonverbal communication is very important. So oftentimes somebody who's conducting an active shooting situation is looking for someone. They might be listening for people's voices or areas that they can move to and target more victims. So try to think about some nonverbal communication methods, signaling, and so that you can apply to, because all of these things are different components that can increase your ability to make it through an active shooting event. Another important thing that you should be doing well in advance is to try to figure out where your assembly or evacuation zones might be. Each of the buildings here in our facility do have areas delineated for people to go to in the event. And I recognize that the assembly points is kind of almost like a double-edged sword in some cases. So you have to think this through, and determining the situation, make some judgment calls there as well. Once you get to a safe location, that's when you should be looking at contacting emergency services, calling 911. It's also very good if you can, if you've got the frame of mind to do so, during the time of the event, if you happen to see the shooter, take some information. And when you contact 911 or emergency services, provide them with as much information as you possibly can. Let them know if you know if there's a certain number of potential victims, the weapon kind and type used. That's important too for law enforcement when they arrive. Very critical to know the address of the facility. As much of a description as you can of the event happening is going to help the law enforcement authorities too. So the key thing is, be aware of what you can do to take that next step and assist in law enforcement, getting to the site, clearing the site. And again, remember, they may not make it there in time. As I mentioned at the beginning, most of these events happen within 10 seconds or less. And oftentimes, by the time law enforcement get there, the active shooting event may be over. So running is important, but then once you get to a safe location, make sure you take those next necessary steps to help end the situation. Briefly addressed some of the components of the first part of the run, hide, and fight strategy. And in the following month, we will actually dig a little bit deeper into the hide element of it. That's also an important part of the strategy altogether. And we'll talk a little bit more about what you can do to kind of put yourself in a situation where you're not going to be visible or a straight out target for an active shooter too. Again, probably one of the most important things of this first briefing is for you to take aware the message that everybody needs to make themselves mentally and physically prepared to respond to an active shooter situation. So I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest underlying messages of this entire program. But definitely on the first stage, you've got to focus on getting yourself out of danger's way in any fashion possible. So one other thing that I will mention at the onset of this training is that later on in the year, we will be delivering a more lengthy, probably about an hour-long program, and we'll determine how to deliver that. We're still kind of in the planning phases for that, but there are a lot of things involved in this, and so with a longer program, we'll actually be able to do some role play and look for places that we can actually run and hide in. So that's another step that we're going to be taking in conducting this training. Be on the lookout for information about that, but that's going to be forthcoming. So with this one, we want to focus on the first element, and that is the run, which we did for the most part with these slides. So we recognize that some folks will still have questions about the program and ideas and notions and how to respond. So feel free to reach out to me directly at the admin building, and you can email to mkundu@awwd.com. So that's MKUNDU. And the other tool that I'll encourage you to look at is I distributed a bunch of these desk reference guides. So these should be available in all buildings as well. So there's a section here at the bottom that says threatening behavior, bomb threats, and then on top of that there's active shooters as well. So look at these. There's sort of a very quick method of reference in case you need that as well, and everybody should have that. But if you have any further questions, reach out to me directly. You can also call me on my cell, 425-879-4676. And if you have any questions, let's get those resolved at this point well in advance of the fact that you might need them someday. So thanks so much for your attention.